Welcome to the School Leadership Show. I'm Mike Dowdy. This is the only podcast dedicated to helping practicing and aspiring school leaders realize their potential, advance their careers, and achieve work-life balance. We bring together the greatest minds from inside and outside of education to deliver you the insights and tools you need to succeed in school leadership. This is the show we wish we had 20 years ago. This show is about you. We're here to help you become the best school leader you can be while still having a life outside of work. In this episode, I interview educator and author Kim Marshall. You can access much of Kim Marshall's work for free at www.marshallmemo.com. His weekly Marshall Memo helps countless educators stay current on what's happening in K-12 education. We talk about how he creates and publishes the Marshall Memo, where education is headed in the next decade, best practices in teacher evaluation, how to stay current in the field, good habits that successful administrators have, and rookie mistakes to avoid. Enjoy this interview with Kim Marshall. I'm here with Kim Marshall, and thanks for joining me, Kim.
Great to be here.
Author, educator. Could you just tell listeners a little bit about your background and what you're currently working on?
Sure. I started teaching in 1969 right out of college in a sixth grade class in a middle school in Boston. Was there for 11 years. Got bitten by the administrative bug in the late 70s. Went back to graduate school for a year and to be a principal, but then had bad luck. Some legislation passed. Boston closed a lot of schools, so I wasn't in the principal's chair, but actually wound up in the central office for 6 years, working on curriculum, speech writing for a dynamic superintendent. Eventually got to be a principal in 1987, and was principal of a large elementary school for 15 years. So, 32 years in the Boston schools. Gave a big part of my life to it. Think I made a difference. I was a good but not great principal. I got exhausted and kind of burned out at the end, and stepped out of the principalship, left the Boston schools, and became a consultant. And at this point, I've been doing for the last 12 years three things. I'm a consultant and a coach of principals. So each week, I'm down in New York from Boston on the train, working one-on-one with about 12 principals. And that just was with 3 of them this last week. The second thing is I do a lot of speaking and writing on the issue of teacher supervision, and have a book out about that, and have some passionate views about how to do that, gleaned from my years as a principal and from the stuff I read and the people I work with. And the third thing is the Marshall Memo, which is a weekly publication summing up the best research and writing, which I now have time to read for, and put that out once a week.
All right, so much to talk about. First, I can't believe you made it out of the Hotel California that is central office.
Yeah, it's funny because the superintendent I was working for at first, Bud Spillane, who actually came from New York State, he was in the New York State Department of Ed for a while, he kept telling me I didn't need to be a principal. He said, you can skip that stage. But I really disagreed, and I really wanted, from everything I read, I really felt the principalship was the job, and I just finally managed to escape achieved escape velocity and got away and got into a school and really just loved the job, although it is, of course, as you know, totally exhausting. But I did last for 15 years.
And my 10 years as an elementary school principal were some of my best. I still wonder why I left.
Yeah, well, it might have been the same reason I left.
So this week you published Marshall Memo number 586, right?
Correct.
For around 586, and by my calculations, you're closing in on 12 years of.
That's it.
Am I close?
It's been 50 issues a year, and this September I will have had 12 years.
So, how do you decide what goes in each memo?
Well, so the memo started with just this vague idea once I left the principalship that I had never had time to read stuff as a principal. I had kind of Kaplan and had leadership and had week, but I just I was always behind on them. Always felt guilty that I was missing good stuff. Now all of a sudden I had time to read, and I floated the idea by a couple of colleagues, one in New Leaders for New Schools, John Schnur, and one John Safier, who's an old friend and consultant who runs a consulting firm here, and both of them agreed to basically stake me to a year to see if I could make this work. And I started subscribing to everything I could get my hands on. I actually walked through the Harvard Ed School periodical section, writing down likely publications, and spread my net pretty widely. I started off with about 30 or so publications, and just they started coming in. I'm kind of a hard copy guy, and got into a rhythm that has really been just the right rhythm. I think I kind of lucked into it, which was a weekly publication and a rhythm of reading on Sunday, so sitting down on Sunday and reading through what had come in that week. And some of these are quarterlies, some of them are weeklies, some of these are dailies, but just whatever's there on my desk, it piles up and sit down in a comfortable chair and read. It's pretty consistently, it takes about 7 or 8 hours to read through and to try to find the articles that are the most of interest to principals, lead teachers, superintendents, others who are in the front lines of K-12 education. And I'm finding that I can spot these things. They sort of jump out. It's basically, out of 150 articles I'm skimming through on a Sunday, usually there are 5 or 6 that really jump out as being actionable, interesting, provocative, something we should be thinking about, a new idea or an old idea stated well. And then on Monday, I sit down and write, and that's serious work. I mean, Sundays, I can take a nap, I can, listen to music occasionally, but Monday is just very hard work of trying to do an intellectually responsible job of summarizing each article. And that is sort of basically about 12 hours of writing. And then my wife comes home from her very busy job and helps me proofread at about 9 o'clock on Monday night, finding a lot of typos and cleaning it up and bringing in some good political judgment about the way I'm saying things. And then I have, because I'm exhausted at that point, a checklist to go to get the thing ready to send out, to upload it to the website, and then to start it sending. And it takes about 21 hours to send. So it starts late Monday night and sends all day Tuesday. I have software that sort of personalizes it to each person, but I'm always on a train Tuesday morning heading down to New York City while this is going on. So that's the system.
Wow.
And I do take 2 weeks off in the summer.
So compliments to your wife, because I think I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen a typo.
Well, yeah, she's terrific.
So
she's got a really, really good eye.
So you've been dialed into education and school leadership for a long time, both as a leader and, as a coach, and certainly in the publication of the memo. What are some of the biggest changes that you've seen in the last decade, and kind of where do you see us going in the next 10 to 15 years?
Well, I recently actually have started giving a talk about this very subject, so your question is a timely one. And basically it's sort of what are sort of the 10 big changes in education in the last decade and what so. And so, if you're interested, I can run through these pretty quickly.
Great.
Should I do that? Or,
yeah, absolutely.
So I think one thing, and these are all beliefs that I used to have that have been sort of flipped 180 degrees in the last few years. So the first one is that IQ and talent are fixed at birth. I think a lot of us sort of come up with this idea that you either have it or you don't, in terms of basketball playing, in terms of chess acumen, in terms of math ability, and so forth. And really, Carol Dweck and others have done a great job of refuting this and showing us that it's all about application and hard work, and not everyone's going to go to the Olympics, but you really can get good at almost everything. I'm sure you've seen Carol Dweck's book, Mindset.
Oh, it's a fantastic
book.
There's
a wonderful, wonderful page in there showing the drawings of before and after drawings that people make of themselves, self-portraits, before and after a 5-day art course.
Yep.
Drawing course, and it's an amazing page that just shows how talent can be developed. And all these people thought they couldn't draw, and after 5 days of good instruction, they can draw. They draw amazingly well. So I think that's a real breakthrough. And my favorite book on that is The Talent Code, which is about the development of high ability around the world, whether it's chess or tennis or basketball or soccer or whatever. So that's a biggie. A second belief that's been refuted is that poverty is destiny. And I think a lot of people are still on this one, that we can't really do anything until we conquer poverty and social injustice. And in the meantime, there's some schools that are doing it all over New York State and all over the country and the world. A few teachers in a few schools, not a lot, but I think we really have deconstructed what it takes to change a kid's life, even walking into school with serious disadvantages. And that actually is what inspired me to get involved in urban education in the first place, was the work of Ron Evans. And And there's been a whole series of educators since then who've really showed how it can be done. The third, and I'll stop after about 5 here, but the third is the principals are doomed to be managers and not leaders. That this instructional leadership business is basically impossible. And I think, again, the research here is terrific, but it's a daily struggle. You're never recovered, you're recovering. And in fact, in last week's memo, I had a wonderful article by a principal who confessed that he had spent a large part of the day organizing the keys in the building.
I remember that. That was a good one.
Something that he might have delegated, but it was satisfying, and he wanted to do it, and he did it. And so you're constantly, and this is a good principle, that you're constantly trying to escape these satisfying small tasks and get into the really hard stuff that you have to be doing. And I think the last one I'll mention is, well, actually, let me do two more. Is that the teaching, you're either born a teacher or you're not. You either have it or you don't. It's this God-given talent. And again, we're showing, and I think the best book on this is Doug Lamotte's book, Teach Like a Champion, which is now in its second edition, in which he describes in detail 62 specific teaching techniques that can be developed. Some people are naturals, but a lot of us aren't, and we can develop these specific abilities that make us effective with kids. And he's got wonderful videotapes of teachers doing these things. And then the last one.
And I don't know. I'm interrupt you for a second. I don't know about you, but I sometimes I feel like I should that very first year teaching. I should go back and give that district like half the salary back. From my, think of the way I was when I started, and then.
Well, I think I should have been fired. I don't know about a refund. Although I must say that the first year I taught in 1969-70, my salary was $5,750.
That's unbelievable.
So the refund would not be huge.
No, they have to be adjusted for inflation. So
yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. It might be a little higher. And then the last one I'll mention, these are just big shifts in thinking, is I think I find that I just was in Yonkers on Thursday yesterday. And, a lot of people have gotten very cynical about teacher evaluation, that it's just not working and all this drudgery we do of going in and taking notes, and that it's just silly and a waste of time. And I really think teacher evaluation can work, supervision evaluation, and that's been a lot of my work is to try to convince people to do it a little bit differently and to really see a trusting, coaching relationship developing with teachers and a valid and accurate evaluation at the end of the year. In fact, I'm just right now writing an article about this and about Governor Cuomo's work around the state, around how this system can, in fact, work.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because that's kind of where I wanted to head next, is what, a lot of my colleagues can't say enough good things about your work around more frequent classroom visits. So you talked a little bit about how it can be a system that works. What are some of the things that we need to do differently generally?
Well, I think the traditional system of the pre-observation conference, the full lesson observation with detailed note-taking, evidence gathering, and then the write-up or the rubric scoring of that observation, and then the post-observation conference, that traditional process, which takes about 4 hours to do thoroughly. It actually takes 6 hours in Chicago because they have a more detailed rubric. And that process, I think there's overwhelming consensus that it simply doesn't work. That it doesn't change teaching. The teachers get this, they sign it, maybe they object to a couple of details, but they basically sign it, and it's done very infrequently because it's so time-consuming. It can only be done once or twice a year. And so this traditional process is a mess. And my basic platform is we just should stop doing that. Especially ineffective if it's an announced observation where the teacher puts on a special performance, an atypical dog and pony show that doesn't represent daily practice.
You must have seen a bunch of those as a principal.
Oh yes,
they were
5 or 6 years. I did this, and I was good at doing the write-ups, but I did notice that it wasn't making any difference. And so, here, what's wrong with this picture? You have administrators working very hard at something that doesn't make a difference. And, it's sort of, I have in my presentations, I have 4 quotes from these, luminaries like Rick DeFore and Mike Schmoker and James Popham and others and principals saying, this is just a lot of work for nothing. But we can see why this exists. Teachers, the basic job of supervising all this teaching, and each teacher is teaching about 900 lessons a year. And in a moderate-sized school, you might have as many as 27,000 lessons being taught. So how can you get a fair picture of this? And this is what's led to this current idea of using test scores to evaluate teachers, which seems, again, very logical to a person on the outside, a hedge fund manager, or a governor, or a superintendent, or even a superintendent. It just seems logical that you can't get in there and watch all these classes. So let's use test scores to evaluate. As everyone knows at this point, there is some very serious methodological problems with that approach. And so what do you do? Well, to cut to the chase, about 5 or 6 years into my principalship, I had this sort of epiphany that it wasn't working and I was wasting all this time. And so, and I was good at it, but it wasn't effective. A teacher made a comment, somebody made a comment, and I just sort of stumbled upon an idea that many principals have stumbled upon, which is, let's get into classes more frequently. Let's not stay the whole lesson. Let's stay 5 or 10 minutes, and let's then talk to the teacher face to face, preferably in their classroom. When the kids aren't there, just talk about what we saw. And some people are very skeptical. I always do a brainstorming of what can teachers object to in this, and there are always 10 or 11 reasons. The main one, which is what can you see in 10 minutes? Well, all you got to do is play a videotape of 10 minutes of instruction, or go into a classroom for 10 minutes to realize, heavens, you see so much. And really, the difficulty of it is not that you didn't see enough. It's which of the 5 or 6 things you saw you should talk about. And so this combination of short, frequent visits, and I'm talking at least 10 a year, with prompt, within 24 hours, a prompt conversation with a teacher, ideally in their classroom, talking about what we saw, appreciating what was effective, and questioning or perhaps out and out criticizing what wasn't effective, and gradually coaching and changing teaching over time. That to me is a winning formula. So as I said, I stumbled into this. Wasn't very good at it at first. I got better at it, coached by the teachers, by the way, and found that at the end of the year of 10 visits like this, I was doing an average of 10 or 11 per teacher. And this is in an inner city school with 600 kids and 42 teachers and lots going on. But I was able to do this because the visits are short and the conversations were short. And we stopped the traditional system with union approval, and our union people were tough, but we just stopped doing the traditional system because everybody acknowledged this is far better, far more accurate. So in my presentations, I use clickers. I use anonymous response devices, and at the end of describing this and talking it through, I always ask, okay, so which is more accurate in terms of assessing teachers? 1 or 2 traditional evaluations, the full traditional system, or 10 or so many observations with feedback conversations. And in Yonkers yesterday, there were 2 groups. One group, there was 1 dissenter, and the other group, it was unanimous. Usually it's unanimous that the many observations are just far more accurate and then far more helpful in creating a trusting dialogue, good coaching relationship, and actually improving teaching and learning.
So are these, for lack of a better term, these mini observations or shorter observations, are they announced, unannounced?
No, unannounced. Yeah,
unannounced.
I'm sorry. I should have stressed that. They're all unannounced and randomly distributed so that you're getting a picture of the beginning, middle, and end of lessons, beginning, end of the day, after lunch, Monday, Friday, or just and different subjects. Elementary teachers, math, English, social studies, science, and so forth. So you're really trying to. Now, I have to say that there are people who think that 10 visits are not enough. Paul Damrick Santoyo, who's an educator in Newark, New Jersey, who's written 3 books now and is running some charter schools in Newark, makes a strong case that you have to actually get in more frequently. And in his schools, he has everybody doing this, all the coaches and instructional people, and they're able to get in every week. So there's disagreement on this. A number of districts have dialed back to like 6 mini observations in the course of the year. So we have a whole range, and we're going to have to wait for the research on this. But I'm thinking that around 10 is good. But the leap of faith here is it's very hard to do that and the traditional evaluations.
Right.
And so, for example, New York City 2 years ago tried to keep doing at least 1 or 2 formals, the traditional 4-hour process, and do short visits, and it proved to be unmanageable because the formals are so time-consuming.
So,
Yonkers has the same kind of thing. They're trying to do formals and what they call walkthroughs, and it's just very, very, very hard to do both with quality. So it's really a leap of faith. You got to kind of let go of the old one.
Yeah, it's that loss aversion of the familiar process. Now, what kind of documentation is effective for that type of observation process?
Because, well, that's a great question. So in the 9 years that I did this as a principal in Boston, I had these face-to-face conversations and kept sort of brief notes of my own, but I did not give the teacher anything in writing. And I've come to feel that was a mistake. It really undermines, the credibility of the system when you're depending upon people's memory of these conversations.
Right.
And so I've been persuaded now that there has to be some kind of documentation, but I strongly disagree with the documentation being rubric scores or any kind of numerical or rating scores, which is what a lot of districts have fallen into. New York City, for example, after every short observation, there has to be this Danielson scoring on the Danielson rubric. And I think that's a mistake because it really takes away the coaching and the soft skills part of it and focuses the teacher only on, oh my God, I got a developing on this, or I didn't do this, and it also it overwhelms the teacher with too much feedback because you're getting scored on a number of things.
Right.
So the solution, I think, and this was invented in Tennessee by 3 very sharp educators down there, is a software package that has the administrator writing a brief narrative after each short observation. So there's the observation, lasting about 10 minutes, the conversation, which might last 10 or so minutes, and then a brief narrative. And the brilliant idea these guys had down in Tennessee was to limit the narrative to 1,000 characters.
I love it.
So the software literally shuts you down. You can't type another letter or space because you've got to your 1,000. Now, it does count down, so you can watch as you write.
It's
turns out that
it's like 100 tweets. No, 10 tweets.
Yeah, right, exactly. So it's and it gets sent electronically to the teacher, and the teacher gets it. But this is simply confirming what you've already talked about. So it's a summary.
It's not a surprise.
It's not a blow by blow. It's this worked really well, but let me suggest this particular approach, or talk to so and so, or read this. It's very brief. And in fact, in the appendix of my book, I have 20 samples of this from a couple of administrators in New York who've been doing this for a while. And this, to me, this is qualitative feedback. Now, of course, if the teacher is in crisis or things are really, really seriously wrong, then you shift gears. And then you are rubric scoring, and then you are putting people on an improvement plan. But for most teachers, which is like 95% of teachers, this kind of qualitative feedback is good. Then at the end of the year, you do the rubric scoring.
Right.
Then you go through the rubric. The teacher self-assesses. You compare. You debate, and then you actually do scores. Because I think a 4-point scale is a useful scale, and I think the rubrics that are out there, some are better than others, but the rubrics that are out there are basically comprehensive, detailed analyses of teaching, and then it's helpful, I think, to I have one myself. But
I was going to ask if you had a preferred rubric.
Well, of course I like mine, but I like mine because I had the great advantage of looking at Charlotte Danielson's and looking at Robert Marzano's and looking at the NYSET and looking at these other rubrics and saying, okay, I like these part, I like this, but I don't like this, and putting together a better mousetrap. And I've continued to revise mine. I've gone through like 13 or 14 revisions. And mine is one of the approved New York rubrics, and there are a lot of people using it. But there are also a lot of people misusing it in the same way that they're misusing Danielson's. And this is where I think, we really have got to figure this out. What is the appropriate use of a rubric? I mean, basically, it's to help people have a common language about what good and not so good teaching is. That's important. And to provide some kind of summative, detailed evaluation at the end of the year. But I believe it's not for class-by-class scoring. That, to me, really is a misuse.
I would agree with you on that. And I think, in districts across New York State, there's 700 and some districts, and everybody has a different plan that's approved and, an approach to teacher observations. But I wonder about that, the effectiveness of it at the end, that's, you gather all the information, and then you have to put a score on it because that's what the law says, but that the score, now you thinking, does the score happen in your mind, I know it would be great if we didn't have to do a score at all, but since you do, in your mind, is it preferable to be more holistic and by domain or standard, or down at the item level?
Well, so Massachusetts went with that latter approach. That we have, I think, 4 domains in our state rubric, and people just give an overall, okay, you're 1, 2, 3, 4 on that domain, and then some brief narrative comments. And so that's one approach. I actually think that and I've actually scored myself as a teacher, looking back at myself in my last year teaching, and scored myself on the rubric. And I think it's extraordinarily helpful to have that kind of detailed picture. The question is, can an administrator do that fairly and accurately at the end of the year? And I actually think they can. I work with principals all the time, and in workshops that I give, I'll say, okay, get out the classroom management page, think of a teacher you know well, and score them. Start with level 3, start with the effective level, and look left or right, and with each level. And whenever I do this, the room gets very, very quiet. You have 100 administrators just hunched over looking at this thing. And in about 3 or 4 minutes, they have scored the teacher on all 10 of these things on that page. And they feel it's pretty accurate. So what a rubric does essentially is it pulls it out of your memory. It's like a multiple choice test. So it's quite amazing the way, you really can remember. Even though with each of these mini observations, you've only been giving feedback on 1 or 2 things, you see a lot of other things. And gradually the picture gets put together in your head. Also, I'm a strong advocate of the teacher filling out the rubric and coming to the evaluation conference with their own self-assessment and comparing that page by page with the administrators and debating differences. And a lot of teachers are pretty hard on themselves, and often the administrators bucking them up.
Well,
but this actually,
and teachers
sorry.
want to improve. People want to get better.
However, what Governor Cuomo is upset about is that 96% of teachers across the state were effective and highly effective, and he believes there's been great inflation. And he's right. There has been great inflation. The reason is the high stakes. The reason is this public, very high-stakes process where teachers really care about their points and really care about their ratings, which parents have access to. So I think that the error here is in putting too much pressure on everybody. If you have a medium-stakes process, then you're going to get much more honesty from principals, because what principal isn't going to want to, have it publicized that a lot of their teachers are not highly effective or effective. So it's all the incentives are wrong. Now the governor's new solution to this is to bring in outside people to evaluate to backstop the principal. This idea was not thought through because there are going to have to be thousands and thousands and thousands of these people all over the state. I mean, just New York City would be thousands. And who's going to pay these people? How often are they going to evaluate teachers? Will their visits be announced or unannounced? I mean, the idea was not thought through. And I would predict that the state legislature is going to have to backtrack on this one, because it's just, there aren't enough experienced, reliable educators with spare time to go around backstopping all these principals. In the end, principals have got to do this work, and they have to have a viable system that is not too high stakes. And I'm just right in the middle of writing an article on this. I'm going to be sending it out to various people. And in fact, I'll send a copy to you for comments.
I'd love it.
But I think the 4-point scale is helpful, and I don't think it's wrong that teachers should get assessed on a 4-point scale. We used to have a 2-point scale in Boston, unsatisfactory and satisfactory, and that's horrible. That completely disguises mediocrity. You can't highlight teachers, and I think the major moral issues in schools, the major supervisory issues, are the level 2 performance, the developing performance. On a 4-point scale, the third one down is, that's what I see a lot of in classrooms, is
right.
Of teachers who are not horrible, but doing mediocre practices. For example, just to take a very concrete example that I see a lot, only calling on the kids who raise their hands.
Yep.
Now, this is a profoundly mediocre practice, and it's very common, and teachers need to have that highlighted and need to be coached and get suggestions around how they move away from that and move to something that is more effective.
So I'm going to switch gears on you a little bit here. So you've been in a lot of schools, and you've worked with and seen many school leaders. if you had to think about the characteristics of really effective administrators, what distinguishes them from everybody else? And then anything about productivity, especially. That's my goal here with the podcast, is to try to give folks some real practical things they can do to become better school leaders.
Mm. Well, I think the biggest productivity thing is getting into classrooms in a frequent and authentic way. And, this business thing, I'm talking about 10 observations per teacher. A lot of people take that idea and say, that's crazy, how can I do that? But actually, if you do the math, it comes down in most schools to about 2 classroom visits a day. And, of course, there's all the other stuff. There's the discipline and the cafeteria and picking up pieces of paper and the floors and all this other stuff, going to meetings. But I think getting into classrooms and being in enough so that it's no longer a big deal. So the kids are relaxed, they don't get uptight, and the teachers keep going and do their work. And then seeing authentically what's going on, and then talking to teachers afterward and having a real two-way conversation. So that would be, time management-wise, that would be just huge. The other 2 pieces of supervision that I think are not paid enough attention to is unit planning. Getting teacher teams really sitting down with a good backwards design process and putting together high-quality curriculum units. We're talking about the 5-week unit on poetry and the 7-week unit on the Civil War, and just really thinking through. Wiggins and McTighe, I think, are the best thinkers on this, the Understanding by Design guys, and supervising that process. I was with a principal on Wednesday this week in Queens who is a master at this, who really has her teachers in her high school doing really high-quality units, and in every classroom you see the essential questions on the wall. And so everyone's thinking it through, not just at the lesson plan level, but at the unit level. So that's the second huge time management thing, is supervising and orchestrating that process. And then the third thing is supervising and orchestrating a process of teacher teams constantly looking at results. And this is the so-called PLC, professional learning community, data-driven instruction process that I see being done poorly in a lot of places, but very, very well in some places, where the 4th grade team is sitting down and looking in October at the writing assessment that all the kids took and scoring it, and then figuring out what's working and what isn't working, and constantly improving their teaching, because there's no one right way to do this, and only by looking at student results frequently, at least 4 times a year in a systematic way, can we really. So those would be, to me, the big pillars: getting into classrooms, supervising the deep curriculum planning, and then supervising the ongoing results process, and constantly improving teaching. And then, of course, there's the other 99 parts of the job, but those would be the biggies. Yeah.
So time is a finite resource for all of us, especially for school administrators. And other than subscribing to the Marshall Memo, what advice would you have for busy school leaders to stay current on what's going on in the field?
I think Education Week does an absolutely terrific job. I think if you had to subscribe to just 2 things, the first would be the Marshall Memo, and the second would be at Week, because they cover everything. They cover the breaking news, what Arnie Duncan's talking about, what the unions are talking about, this student incident in the school, and they have great profiles of educators in action, and then they have these opinion pieces. So I think Ed Week is terrific. And then if you have a little more time, there's the Bobbsey twins, Ed Leadership and Kaplan, both of which do a very good job, slightly differently.
I have never heard them referred to as the Bobbsey twins.
Yeah, maybe that's unfair. And Ed Leadership has got a lot more subscribers now. Kaplan used to have more, but Ed Leadership is now in the lead. But I think they both do a very solid job. They're a little overwhelming. But they don't come as often, of course. So, but I think those are real things. I happen to love the American Educator, the AFT magazine, which is quarterly, but they do a terrific job of having long, thoughtful articles that are very classroom oriented, and they're not grinding the union axe. I think they're doing a really good job. I periodically do a list of the top ones. You notice, I'm sure, in the Marshall Memo, the Harvard Business Review often has very interesting articles. The New York Times does a very, very good job with education. But I think Ed Week is at the top of it. It just doesn't, and if you look at the frequency in the Marshall Memo, that's by far that has the most summary so far.
So this show is aimed at practicing and aspiring school administrators. And if you think back to your early days as a school administrator, maybe that for those first few months on the job as a principal, what's one mistake that you made, and that, knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently?
Wow. Well, there was one biggie in my first year. There was a group of teachers that took a very strong dislike to me. They were sort of the union folks and some others, and I called them the Gang of Six. And they started to really needle me in anonymous ways. So they would put this anonymous spoof of my staff memo into people's mailboxes. They were very sarcastic, and I overreacted, and almost lost my job. It was a very bad scene where I accused someone of doing something they hadn't done it, and it sort of blew up in my face. And the one thing I should have done was to go and talk to a few teachers that I knew were sympathetic and basically say, what's going on here, and what do you think I should do? Instead, I kind of got isolated and angry and overreacted. So I think having a bunch of people that you sort of talk to, not that you confide in inappropriately, but that you talk to and who can, because they would have told me. These people would have told me. 70% of the staff was with me, and but they were cowed by these very strong-willed and people who just really took this dislike to Kim Marshall and everything I represented. And so that was I think, reaching out. I think that's maybe the moral of the story. There, reach out, talk to people, contain your anger, rather than overreacting.
Okay. So I want to finish up here with a little 3-2-1. So first one, what are 3 pieces of advice that you would give to aspiring and practicing school administrators?
Well, I think it's very important to read and to be thinking about this in a fairly deep way. And I think being on top of the reading and the research, and reading good books like Mindset and Teach Like a Champion and others is important. I think having some mentors, people who really inspire you and keep you honest. I think I didn't have enough of that as a beginning principal, of having people who were coming in and giving me frank advice, and I love doing that now as a coach of principals. And then I think the biggie of getting into classrooms and seeing daily reality, not doing the dog and pony show at all, but really seeing what's happening and appreciating it, and really being kind of interested in what's going on. I am, I've been doing this now for 45 years, and I really am endlessly fascinated every time I walk into a classroom at what's going on, how it's being handled, how the kids are doing, and how the teacher can make it even better. So I think that if you're not really intrigued with that process, then that's a danger sign.
Yep.
If you're more interested in policy or rearranging the keys in the room or in the school or going to meetings, and I know some principals who love to go to meetings and who like to talk about their work, but they're not in there doing it. And so I think getting in there and doing it is just crucial. Being restless, getting out. I mean, I felt guilty when I was sitting in my office. I just, and another thing is, don't do email during the day. Like, save that for the early morning or the late afternoon. Just be out and about. And if anyone thinks that you should be responding to it. In fact, Tony Alvarado, when he was a community superintendent in New York City, when he would call a principal in the middle of the day and they picked up the phone, he would berate them. What are you doing in your office? Why aren't you out in classes? Why aren't you in meetings? Why aren't you working with parents?
All right. How about what are the 2 biggest rookie mistakes that you have seen new school administrators make?
Well, one is getting stuck in the office. I call it the trapped in the office death spiral. And every time you try to get out, someone comes in, you got a minute, and meanwhile stuff is happening all around the school. So getting stuck in the office is one. Getting stuck on email is another. That's one of the things that happens in the office, of course. Being cowed and intimidated by a few people and not reaching out. One of the tools I wish I had as a principal that hadn't been invented when I was in the school was clickers. These anonymous devices. If I had been able to show in staff meetings that there were only 6 people in the room who had a particular point of view, and showed it anonymously, that would have been very powerful. So again, reaching out to the silent majority, as Richard Nixon called them, the people who are out there who want, and And I think one other thing is just it's not stepping up to the plate with mediocre and poor teaching. If a principal is there for X years and leaves and has not moved on an ineffective teacher, that's shameful. And I think that you got to step up, and it takes courage and it takes hard work. And I'm discouraged when I see principals who have grown so cynical that they don't really think they can ever deal with this fifth grade teacher who's just really hurting kids every day. That's not good.
All right. And what's one thing that school leaders could start doing tomorrow that would improve their schools?
Well, it's very fresh in my mind that I was just in Yonkers yesterday and dealing with a bunch of great principals and assistant principals who were very frustrated with their system because it's requiring that they do these very, very time-consuming formals as well as requiring them to do informals. And my advice to them was get in there and do the informals, keep them short, and always have a face-to-face conversation, and gradually build the trust of their staff that a system like this can work better. And because ultimately it's going to have to be a union issue in Yonkers, and the union will, it'll only happen if the union says, okay, either this is an option or let's all do this and move to this system. In the end, of course, it's better and safer for teachers to have administrators around a lot, because if there's a crazy parent who accuses them of something, or if there's some other thing, they're much safer if administrators can say, well, I'm in her classroom all the time. That's not true.
Exactly.
And also, teachers get lonely, and teachers want to talk to adults about their work. And so having a constant stream of substantive conversations based in their reality is just so much healthier. So I just, my advice to them was get in there, do it, have the conversations, minimize the paperwork and the other stuff, and gradually work with the district and the union on getting to the point where people can trust enough to let it go and to do the really substantive work that has to be done to improve teaching and learning.
So, Kim Marshall, thank you so much for this conversation. It was fantastic. Where can people go? Where can people go to learn more about you and your work?
Well, marshallmemo.com is the website, and most of the material there is free and open. Just click on Kim Publications or sort of explore around, and so you don't need to be a Marshall Memo subscriber, and you can see the writing I've done, and most of it, the Kaplan articles are in the private area, but everything else is out there, and you can get a sense of where I'm coming from and some of the battles I've had and the struggles I've had and mostly the mistakes I've made, but I think you can get a sense of that if you have the time.
All right, well, thank you very much, and I appreciate your time and hope we get to talk again soon.
My pleasure. Take care and have a good weekend.
Thanks for listening to the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders by school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to mike@schoolleadershipshow.com. Consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And please pass the show along to your colleagues.